Improving memory is one of those things that the majority of us would really like to do. It can benefit us in work, it can benefit us in study and in our personal lives. So how best can we improve our memory capacity? On this week's episode of GetPsyched, I'm going to look at just that, and I'm going to run you through my top 4 tips on improving your memory based on psychological research, so stay tuned. Welcome guys to another episode of GetPsyched, and as I've already said, I'm going to run you through my top 4 tips of psychologically based research on how to improve your memory. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to run through a psychological appreciation or a description of memory, as I could have an entire video series based on that. Instead, we're going to look at just the top tips for improving your memory capabilities. So let's get into the video. Tip number 1 is creating a structure for your memory. Whitrock and Carter in 1975 created some theories and created some research that illustrated that in order to improve your memory, you had to create a structure, fundamentally meaning that you had to create different links between the different pieces of information that you were trying to remember in order to memorize all of it better. So what does that mean? Well, fundamentally it means that if you study random pieces of information across the board, you're less likely to memorize it. Instead, if you can create and develop and memorize links between those pieces of random information, you're much more likely to memorize it. Basically, Whitrock and Carter ascertained that if you remember one piece of information and develop a link to another piece of information, that opens up a story for you. So if I remember the first piece, I can then remember the second piece and hopefully remember the third piece, and so on. Basically, avoid trying to learn just random bits of information, regardless if it's in the same topic. If you have different pieces of information, then create your own links between them. Maybe there are already links established. And if you can remember those links, if you can create them for yourself, then you're much more likely to create that structure, create that story, and memorize that information better. Okay, tip number 2 is to elaborate on the information that you're trying to memorize further. I understand what you're thinking. This sounds like you're trying to memorize more information in order to memorize the information that you started with, but let me explain a little bit. Let's look at it this way. If you read a piece of information and just hope to absorb it, you're less likely to memorize it than if you have that piece of information and understand the wider context around it. So what we can do instead, and based on psychological research and findings, is that with that piece of information, if we ask questions of it, if we develop our understanding of its context, maybe other findings that are associated with that piece of information, basically if we can create a fuller story of that piece of information, we're going to understand it, we're going to memorize it better. Fundamentally, understanding equates to better memorization. Morris et al. In 1985 found that exact thing and found that we understand and memorize information that we know better. So if we have a piece of information and we understand the context of it, we're much more likely to memorize it. Future psychological research after 1985 found that even when we're trying to learn new information, if that piece of new information is within a field that we understand, we're much more likely to recall it and memorize it. So this stuff really does work. Okay, tip number 3 is to utilize mnemonic techniques for memorization. Now, mnemonics are used fundamentally for memorizing and remembering long codes or long pieces of information based on numbers. In psychological research, you won't find many psychologically based techniques to help you memorize information. However, mnemonic techniques have been studied in psychology and actually have been shown to work. Now, the truth is there are so many different types of mnemonic memorization techniques, and for the purposes of this video and time constraints, I'm not going to go into all of them. What I am going to do though is I'm going to link a couple of websites in the description that you can access, and I encourage you to have a look at those and use one of the mnemonic techniques for yourself. I'll give you a little bit of an example of a mnemonic technique. If you have maybe a telephone number or a bank number that you want to memorize off by heart, instead of remembering every number, what you do is you take each number and associate each number with a consonant. Now you take those consonants and add in some vowels of your own to create a word. In turn, you remember that word and hopefully can in turn remember the long piece of information. Now that sounds quite complex, and it is, but trust me, if you look at those websites and use one of the mnemonic techniques for yourself, you'll realize just how much this can work. Now that example I gave you about mnemonic techniques is a little bit abstract, but if you can create your own mnemonic technique, if you can use one of those from the website and use that a lot and memorize it and associate it to remembering long digits or long numbers, this is really going to help. Okay, tip number 4 is linking pieces of information with visual imagery. Morris and Stephen in 1974 illustrated that mental mnemonics, or linking pieces of information with visual imagery, is seriously effective and actually has been used for up to 2,000 years. Now, you might immediately think that this psychological research says that you have to think of some kind of abstract or strange image in order to help you memorize information. The truth is that you can remember any image that is associated to the information that you're trying to memorize, and it's really going to help. Bottom line is, you don't have to remember a strange image or an abstract image. It can be any image so long as it's associated with the information that you're trying to remember. As we've already talked about, linking information together is vital for any kind of memorization, but especially visual mnemonics, or linking pieces of information with visual imagery. For example, you could remember a large piece of information by putting each piece of information in a visual house. This is quite a famous example. So you could have your own house, for example. You could have your bedroom, and you could have one item or one piece of information that you want to remember written on your bedroom wall. And as you walk through to the bathroom, you can have another piece of information, something else maybe written on the floor, and continue through the house with different pieces of information and hopefully remember things that way. You could also think of it this way: if you've got a shopping list and you need to buy chicken, milk, apples and bananas, you could have a visual image of a chicken swimming in a pool of milk throwing apples at a large banana. Now, that's a terrible example, but you get the point by thinking this way. Okay guys, thanks so much for watching GetPsyched today. Today we've been looking at psychological research, or my top 4 tips in psychological research that are there to help you improve your memory capabilities and capacity. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next week.